Let's get started with frame-by-frame animation in Adobe Animate 2021.
Tip-tot.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Tip-tot and welcome back to Intro to Adobe Animate 2021. In this episode, I'll take you through the basics of frame-by-frame animation. We'll learn the theory behind it using some exercises and then apply it to our example. So let's get right to it. Part 2, frame-by-frame animation. Animating frame by frame simply means drawing one picture, then a slightly different picture, and so on until we get an animation. You probably did this in the corner of your school books as a child, or on a stack of post-it notes to make a flipbook animation. The essentials basically boil down to two things: timing and spacing. The timing of a frame by frame animation comes down to your frame rate. I won't go into details, but the standard frame rate for animation is 24 frames per second. Animators usually make a new drawing every 2 frames, which is called animating on 2s for most movements, but if something is moving very quickly or you need a lot of detail, you place a new drawing every single frame, which is called animating on 1s. Using both of these timings correctly makes for a smooth animation. Spacing involves how you move your objects through that time. For example, if we move this ball in equal increments of space through, say, 13 frames, we get a very linear movement, with the ball moving quite unnaturally. If, however, we make the ball move slowly at the start and end, but faster in our middle frames, we get a much more natural looking movement. You'll also notice that I've squashed and stretched the ball as it moves. This is one of the core principles of animation, which were defined largely by Disney in the 1930s. If you want to make a convincing motion, I highly recommend researching the phrase, the 12 principles of animation. One day perhaps I'll make a series on this, but for now, Alan Becker has a great series that explains them perfectly. Feel free to experiment with making a ball move freely around your stage. Practice and see what feels natural. You can use guides like these to mark out your work. Draw a path for the ball to follow, and marks along that path for where it sits on each frame. Think about what would happen when that ball meets a curve or a hard corner. Okay, let's apply this theory to our animation with our bouncing character in a little bit more detail. Okay, so last episode we animated this very quick and rough bouncing ball just so that you drew something in the first episode. We're actually going to delete this and do a better bouncing ball using the guidelines that we have discussed in this episode. So I'm going to select my layer here and just press the delete icon to add the delete that layer. I'm going to add a new layer in on top, and I'm just going to call this guide. Okay, and rather than making it black, which is kind of hard to see, I'm going to make it like a nice bright orange. And with this, I'm just going to mark where I think the bottom point of our little animation sequence is going to be. And then I'm going to draw up to where I think the top of our little animation sequence should be, like so. So now I've got the highest point and the lowest point, okay? Now, using the same guide technique as before, there's definitely got to be a bit that's right in the middle, but as a ball bounces up and down, it's going to speed up as it falls. It's going to spend a few frames on the floor, and at the apex of its arc, it's going to hover for a few frames as well. So I'm going to put a couple of frames here, so that's going to be one on the way up and one on the way down using the same spacing. There's going to be one in the middle like this. There's going to be one as it's stretching to hit the floor, another as it hits the floor, and then there'd be a second one as well. So there'd be one on the way down and one on the way up here. So this would technically be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Then that would be on the way, let's do that on the way down. So I'll just stick those on the other side just to make it very clear. Okay. Then we're going to have frame 11, frame 13, frame 15, frame 17, and frame 19. So we're going to go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17, 19. Okay, and I'm just going to use this as a guide. So I'm just going to lock that layer. I'm going to turn it to outlines by clicking the little outline icon there, which allows me to see beneath it. Then I'm going to add a new layer underneath that and just call it rough. In fact, I'll call it rough body because we're going to separate out all the elements of our character here. So then I'm just going to give myself a whole bunch of keyframes. Specifically, I'll give myself 20 because we've got 19 frames. Then I'm going to select all of the frames on our rough body layer, right click and choose convert to frame by frame animation, keyframe every other frame. And that will give us our keyframes on 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on. So now we're ready to go and animate. And what we're going to do here is animate straight ahead, because this is quite simple, okay? Animating straight ahead just means literally that. You're going to go from frame 1 through to frame 19 and animate. When it comes to adding the heads and the legs, we may do pose to pose animation, which is where you pick the key poses and then animate the in-betweens later. I'm going to go with my brush tool, which is B. I'm just going to go to a nice solid black line. That's a little bit thick. So I'm just going to take the size and I'm going to drop that down to about an 8. Yeah, that looks much better. So I'm going to zoom in now. I can do this by pinching with my tablet. If you don't, you can press Control, plus and minus. Okay, and we're going to go to frame 1. But first, I'm just going to take a circle that is roughly the size of our character's body using our sketch. And I'm going to position the center of it with our first mark at the very center of that circle. Now I could, if I wanted to, copy this and paste it onto the next frame, but instead I'm just going to go to frame 3. I can't see anything because my onion skin is turned off, so I'm just going to turn that onion skin back on. And I'm just going to draw it with the center now on frame 3 in this position that we've earmarked for frame 3. It's moving quite slowly, so I'm not going to give it too much squash and stretch at the moment. It's going to stay roughly the same shape. And these are only our rough layers. We're going to draw the final neat line on top of that at the end of this tutorial. So at frame 5, we can see that frame 5 is down here in the middle of our ring. So at this point, it's probably, if we had our ball moving, it's probably going to be stretching as he falls down to the ground at this point. So just for clarity, I'm going to copy this shape so that I know I'm working with the same mass. Okay. Then I'm going to move it to the space I want to be. Then I'm going to press Q to bring up my free transform tools. And I'm going to squash and stretch him. Some people might consider this cheating, but it's only for the roughs, so you're never going to see it in the final thing anyway. Frame 7 then, I am just going to copy and paste this layer, but first of all, I will select this and just press delete to get rid of it. So I'm going to Control C, and then Control Shift V will paste it in place on our next frame, allowing me to just move it down like so. And I'm going to do something called point of contact, which means I'm going to make it hit the floor like so. So now we've got our ball falling down and it hasn't lost any mass at all. Okay, on the next frame, it's hit the earth, so it's going to splurge out into the other direction. You could just copy this shape, hit Q, and rotate it if you wanted to. But for this one, I am going to redraw it just so that I don't get into that bad habit. Well, the center of our shape should be here on the keyframe. Our previous frame, the center of the ball is missing. So we should have done something like that, as if his body was turning as it hit the floor, but it doesn't matter too much for this simple animation. For this one, we're going to do the same thing, but his body is going to be squashed out onto the floor. Okay, so he's hit the floor like so. The next frame, that's frame 9 then, which we've just done there, as you can see. The next frame is frame 11. And we've earmarked that he stays in this position for 2 frames. So what I'm going to do is just push it just a little bit further. Okay, I'm not too happy with that. So I'll just select it and delete it. And I might rotate my canvas with R or Shift H, I think is the default. Just because I'm left-handed, drawing on a slant like this is a little bit easier for me. Okay, click that button at the top to recenter back up my frame. That's our frame 11. Frame 13 is when it's going to start reaching back out into the sky, and we want that to be quite explosive. So I'm going to go from this relatively flat and squish shape back to something more similar to our previous frame. Okay, so boing, boing, nice. It's looking pretty good. Moving on to frame 15 here. Okay, I'm just going to redraw. And I know that sometimes I've used the center point of these balls to line up with the mark. Sometimes I'm offsetting them. Sometimes I'm not using the guide. But that's exactly all that it is. It is just a guide. You don't have to follow it if you notice something that looks a little bit better. And what I'm doing in my head sort of automatically is kind of tweaking this as I go. I might rotate that around because the mass I feel would be more towards the top of the ball. So I'm just going to hold control and drag out these individual points as well to kind of round out that circle. Come up to frame 17, and then frame 19 is actually going to be like the same as frame 1. So I'm actually going to go to frame 1, copy it, paste it in place there, just so that I've now got the before and after on my onion skin. Okay, then I'm going to do my frame 17, and again I'll do the exact same thing I did before, which was to trace frame 1 and just move it down slightly. Okay, for frame 19, what I'm going to do is I'll delete it now because we've got that original guide, and I'm just going to put it ever so slightly below where frame 1 was, just so that when it comes back to loop, it's not exactly the same. Okay, and there you can see we've got our bouncing body. So let's go to show frame. I'm going to turn on this button here, which is the looping button. Alt-Shift-L is the option for that. And then I'm just going to drag this little blue bar out until it fills our timeline, so that when I press space, we can see it starting to bounce properly. That looks pretty good to me. I think it hangs in the air a little bit long, so what I might do is try removing these last 2 frames with just a right click. That looks much better to me. Okay, and that's because we just duplicated that last frame, frame 1 and frame 19. Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I was just taking a break from doing the animation on this intro to Adobe Animate series, which I don't know about you, but I've found really useful. If only there was a way that I could thank the person who made this series. Oh wait, I already have, because I bought this t-shirt from youtube.com/tiptup/store. You can get this t-shirt, hoodies, dog hoodies, pencil cases, all sorts of merchandise from youtube.com/tiptup/store. Or alternatively, if you're not into the dopest, finest, premium quality tees and you aren't a fan of merch, you could alternatively click that join button below to become a member of TipTut and join the TipTut Zone along with all of the other members for exclusive perks and benefits to the channel. I'm not very good at adverts. Back to the video. So that's the basics of what I'm going to do for the rest of this character, is add in the keyframes that I need, use guides if I need to, and we're going to go through now and just add the head and the legs as well. Now the head is exactly the same process as this ball, apart from we're going to have it rotating around the body. So what I like to do is I'm just going to add a new layer on top, select all of these layers again, frames again, convert to frame by frame animation, keyframe every other frame. So now I've got an exact duplicate but empty of the lower layer below. Then I'm going to grab a bright red brush, and I'm going to go to the frame which most closely resembles that frame we've got here, which I'm going to say is this one. And where the head is, I'm just going to draw a dot for where I want the head to connect to the body. Okay. Now I could work backwards, I could work forwards, but essentially I want this to rotate in a nice and neat circle around the body. So by this point, I'm going to say his head will be here. On this next frame here, it's not going to have moved much, but it will have rotated a little bit. By here, I'm going to say it's going to be perfectly in line with the center. And then we know, but by this frame, it's just stretching out and boom. It's hit the floor and snaps down. On our next frame, it's going to be facing down on the floor. Our next one here, it's going to do quite a quick movement, but it'll work in motion, trust me. So it's going to move around to the other side of the body. Here, it's going to be up this side of the body. And by here, it's going to be back up at the top. And then if we watch that in cycle, it's kind of spinning around. It does jump a little bit. So on that first frame, I'm just going to move it back slightly. And on those squished frames, I might just, let's just forego the rules here, I think. And let's change it so that his head is completely upside down as he hits the floor here, because that's going to be a little bit nicer. I'll move it so his head's lower here, hits the floor, it's upside down. This side will just move his head over this way a little bit. As it's squishing, it's going to continue to turn. And that should make a little bit of a better. Boom. Cool. So now we're going to use that red dot to just draw a circle for the head. And I'm going to fast forward through this section because it's exactly the same as the body. And I want to make sure you guys just aren't straight up copying me. So what we're going to do is add, we'll call this head, rough head. And using my black pen, just eyedropping with I key there, I'm going to start drawing my character's head. Again, I'm going to start maybe on, let's start on the first frame. Why not? I'm going to zoom in. And you have to think about the forces that are applied to their head. So I'm going to say something like that for the first bit. Slightly smaller than body, but otherwise a circle. I forgot to add in... Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry, I'm on the right layer. That's fine. At this point, the head started to move, so it's going to stretch a little bit as it rotates, and so on. Okay, so there you can see it, just a quick addition of the head rotating around the body there. So now we've got the basic form of our character bouncing up and down. On top of this, it's now time to add all of the details. We'll do the arms and legs in one go together, and then I'll go back through and do the facial features in time-lapse mode because they're quite simple. Okay, so we're going to add a new layer on top. We're going to select all of these layers, right-click, convert to frame by frame, keyframe every other frame, and now we've got a duplicate but empty. We're going to go to rough, and we'll call this rough limbs. Now, I'm going to go to, let's say this frame here. I'm going to turn off onion skin so it's a little bit easier to see. At this point, his body's falling straight through the air. Everything's forced down upon him, but his head has made solid connection with the ground already. Yeah, bam. So his arms might, which were previously up like this, might bend, okay? So we're just going to try and attach this to his body. We can use little points if we wanted to, so we could go through and we could just say, you know, these are the points where his arms would attach, but I'm just going to run straight through and do it straight ahead. At this point, I'm going to say his arms are still pretty much outstretched, but otherwise just a little bit crooked. And we'll draw in his fingers because why not? This arm here as well, we're going to have it following the same kind of trajectory. Because he's spinning as he moves as well, you need to make sure that if possible, your arms are like following the curvature of that spin, okay? So let's start there with those arms like this. I'm going to go back a frame, turn my onion skin on, and then I'm going to hide my sketch layer just so it's a bit easier to see. And it's just a case of drawing something, adjusting it if needs be, so that you get nice curves between the previous frame and the next frame, yeah? So when you flip back and forth between the two, you can kind of see where that motion is going to come from. Same thing goes for here. We'd add probably a little bit of a curve to the arm, like so. He's hit the floor now and his body has started to turn. So to help draw the viewer's eye with that, you just make sure that there's a little bit of overlap with those arms. You know, the arm's now on the other side of his body, but there's no reason that it can't come through like that, so that the path of motion for that particular arm is quite similar. I think I just drew that on the wrong layer. Yes, I did, but that's okay. I'll just copy and paste it. It's only guides anyway, so it doesn't really matter. This next line here, all the energy has come out of his body. So I'm going to say that this arm is going to be pretty much flopped onto the floor now. And this arm over here has continued its downward trajectory because his body's spinning like this. So his arm would sort of force itself this way, I believe. But let's see if it looks good. No, it looks kind of janky, right? So what we'd probably do is select this, get rid of it. Oops, let me just lock those other layers so I don't accidentally select them. I think maybe then let's have his arm sort of fall this way instead. Yeah, that looks much better. Okay, so moving on. I think at this point his arm would start to drag itself back upwards. And this arm here would start to turn around the other way. Because his nose is kind of over here now, right? So at this point, start to perhaps be dragged down like this from the force of the arms. And then by here, what we'll do is we will take those original frames again if we unlock them. We'll take those original frames again, we'll hold Alt and drag them to the end, just so that whilst we're working on this loop, we can see what that original frame looks like. Here we're going to what we're going to do. Here we're going to have his arms be facing, oops, I've gone into orange there. Here we'll have his arms facing the camera. And his like back arm whipping around like this. So that when we get into what is essentially the first frame, his arms are going to be kind of just curving up like this. Okay? Because now we can then transition to these sections here where his body rotates. Because at this point we'd have his arm start to curve upwards. This back arm starting to curve upwards too. So that when it comes to this next frame, it looks more like a seamless loop. Okay? We'll remove these frames again because we don't need them. It's losing a little bit of impact because although his body hits the floor, his arms here should already be flat, I think. So let's fix that by selecting the arm layers. Ah, yes, I'd drawn those on the wrong layer, didn't I? So let's select that with a loop tool and just delete that. Again, doesn't matter because this is only the sketch, so it doesn't matter too much if it's not that neat. And I think what we'll do is we'll just draw the arms like a simple ease. Just ahead of their previous or their next coming up position. So bam, you get a bit more of a solid splat on the floor there. Great. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing with the legs now, but it uses the same principle. So I'll fast forward through this section. Okay, so there we go. As you can see, I did pretty much the same thing for the legs there. If we just flip through this frame by frame, you'll notice that I've got the legs following the same trajectory as the body, rotating around, hitting down, squashing onto the floor there with the arms, rotating, coming up the other way on the other side of the body, and then eventually looping back around to its original position, like so. So now we've got the arms, legs, and head attached, but we haven't yet done the features. So I'll just pop those features on a new layer using the same technique as before. Right click, keyframe every other frame. And all this animation is going to be on 2s because it's fairly consistent. There's nothing moving terribly quickly. If you wanted to, you could flap the hair about on this one on 1s. I'm going to leave it on 2s just for ease of use for this tutorial, but feel free to do that if you'd like. I am going to draw the face in a different color rather than black. Let's do it in something like bright green, just so it's really easy to see. And I'll turn back on my sketch layer so that I can see the original kind of facial structure here. So we want these big green googly eyes with the sort of cross-eyed effect and an upturned, upset mouth with just a simple tongue in it. There's also the 3 bumps for the hair and a sort of semi-half circle with a lip for the hat. Okay. This one we will turn the onion skin on, and this is just a case of just making sure that you're tracking the position of the eyes to the position of the head. As the head rotates, obviously so will its features, and you need to make sure that you're rotating those features with it. Also that they're not growing and shrinking too much, but also most importantly that you add in the emotion here. Okay, so I've got the cross-eyed to make him look really confused, but at the same time, as he hits the floor here, his eyes should almost certainly squint shut and his mouth would turn into like a grimace of pain, okay? Not only that, but you can add in funny stuff like his hat gets completely flattened and his hair as well. And then at this point, you could even have his hair on backwards as his face just gets dragged along the grass here. Maybe his eyes and his mouth open up again by this point. Just so you can get some of that emotion back in. And it's just a case of trying to make sure that you maintain the direction on these details. Here it's mostly the hair and the tongue of the hat that you need to make sure aren't losing direction. This is a bit of a different one because he's now looking kind of downwards like this. So we need to draw the hat like so. And if you can't see the hair, it will look strange. So we'll just add it kind of on the side of his head. You know, why not? He's a simple enough character. Maybe he's a cartoon, so his features do erupt off of his face a little bit. By this point, the hat's starting to come back to the right way, so we can draw the hair in a bit easier. But again, his facial features showing that emotion. And this is the frame before the last. So we will just drag out over these frames again with the Alt key. Just so that we're not making them too different by accident. 1, 2, and then 3 bits of hair. And then the mouth there, like that. So we're leaving these as pretty loose. Because this is just the roughs for this section. But let's take a look. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. He bounces nicely. He's got all of his limbs moving in the right directions, all that sort of stuff. He goes a little bit off screen, but not to worry. We'll be dealing with that next episode when we deal with our symbols. For now, though, practice this. Make sure that this guy is moving to a situation that you're happy with. Once he is, you'll be doing the next section, which is, firstly, you just name this rough face. But the next section is to add a new layer on top, right click, convert to frame by frame, keyframe every other keyframe. So there you go, same as before. Lock and outline all of the below layers, hide your sketch layer, and if you'd like to hide your guide layer as well. And at this point, I'd probably drag the guide below everything else. Now you get to do the fun bit, which is inking. Now, inking is just the process of drawing your neat lines. So I'm just going to grab a black pen, make sure I'm happy with the size, and I'm just going to go through and try to make it as neat as possible. I'll fly through this bit because there's no real technique to it. It's just trying to draw what you've already drawn just a little bit neater. So I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so there we have it, our looping line work animation. Now I'm just going to hide all of these guide layers by clicking and dragging over this eye icon here, which will just leave us with our line work, and you can see what we're working with. I think that looks pretty good. Like I said, we've drawn him a little bit high up. We'll have to shift him down, but don't worry, we'll be talking about that next episode when we get into working with symbols inside of Adobe Animate. So that is it for this time around. Have a play, redraw him a couple of times if you're not happy with how he's bouncing around, but hopefully this has given you a little bit of an introduction in how to work with frame by frame animation inside Adobe Animate. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time for the next episode of this series on TipTut. I'd like to say a massive thank you to my level 2 and above members. Ghosts, WN62, Anonymous, Mel M. Hoover, Maybe Sharma, Ralika M, Mun336, Ian Costello, Dushyant Sinj, Davinch Goel, and Lone Wolf 16. Thank you very much, everyone. You're making a very Merry Christmas here at TipTut. If you'd like to become a member of the TipTut Zone to get access to exclusive perks such as discounts, access to the Discord, shoutouts on videos, and personal design feedback, please consider hitting that join button below.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.